Poland, 1943. The morning mist clung to the cobblestone streets of the small village of Wysoka, a village now under the shadow of German occupation. Smoke rose from chimneys, mingling with the scent of damp earth and burning coal. In the dim light, 10-year-old Jacob Nowak moved silently, clutching a satchel heavy with bread, herbs, and a few stolen potatoes. He knew the soldiers patrolling the outskirts, their boots thudding against the wooden planks of the bridge, each step a harsh drumbeat echoing in the quiet of the dawn. But Jacob had a secret. Hidden in the dense forest beyond the fields, dozens of villagers waited, starving and terrified, relying on him for survival. Every step was a risk. Jacob had watched his father taken 2 months earlier, dragged from their home for refusing to collaborate with the occupying forces. His mother whispered to him every night, teaching him which paths were safest, how to hide in the hollow of a tree or under a pile of leaves, and when to run if danger approached. Today, he would deliver food and a message to the elders hiding near the riverbank, the current carrying a silent threat, as well as the lifeline he needed to maintain. The note in his pocket contained a coded message: instructions for evacuation, warning of soldiers' patrols, and the location of hidden supplies. His heart pounded as he approached the edge of the forest, each snap of a twig underfoot sending a jolt of fear through his small body. He paused, listening intently, and thought he heard voices, soldiers laughing as they inspected the far side of the bridge. But it was only the wind through the birches, rustling in a mocking imitation of danger. Jacob remembered the night before, huddled beside his mother near the cold stove, her hands shaking as she handed him the satchel. "Be careful, Jacob," she whispered. "They watch everything, but you are clever. Remember what your father taught you. Every step must be quiet, every movement deliberate." Jacob had nodded, though fear gripped him in icy waves. Even now, as he navigated the winding dirt paths, he could hear the faint echoes of distant artillery fire from towns far beyond their village. Smoke sometimes rose in thick clouds on the horizon, reminding him of the war that had swallowed so many lives already. He adjusted the satchel on his back, feeling the rough burlap scrape against his shoulder, and kept moving, bending low beneath overhanging branches. The forest seemed alive. Shadows stretched. The riverbank came into view, its waters dark and turbulent from recent rains. Jacob crouched behind a fallen log, scanning the area. The elders huddled together, shivering, their thin blankets barely shielding them from the chill. Eyes wide, they spotted him, and relief swept over their faces. He approached slowly, careful not to make a sound that might alert any nearby patrols. One of the older women whispered thanks, her voice trembling, as he handed out the bread, herbs, and potatoes. Then he passed the folded note to the village leader, who studied it carefully, nodding. Jacob allowed himself a small, fleeting smile, knowing that he had delivered hope along with food. He had become more than a boy. He had become a lifeline. Even as he lingered for only a few minutes, Jacob's mind raced. He mapped the safest path back through the woods, imagining soldiers' boots cracking twigs in their search for hidden villagers. Every shadow seemed alive, every movement potentially deadly. He could not afford to hesitate. The sun began to climb higher, dispersing the mist and revealing the harsh reality of the war-stricken village. Houses bore the marks of shellfire, fences lay broken, and livestock huddled in frightened silence. Jacob kept his gaze forward, memorizing every detail to avoid patrols and traps. Every step a balance between life and death, hope and despair. The forest swallowed him as he returned, the canopy muffling his movements. Jacob moved with practiced precision, guided by the secret knowledge passed from his parents, aware that each successful delivery not only fed the villagers, but strengthened a fragile resistance. In the distance, a crow cawed, breaking the morning stillness, and Jacob flinched instinctively, imagining the soldiers had spotted him. He slowed, breathed deeply, and pushed onward, feeling the weight of the satchel and the unspoken responsibility pressing against his small chest. Each journey was a gamble, every heartbeat a reminder that the survival of many depended on the courage and cunning of one small boy, moving silently through the misty streets and shadowed woods of occupied Poland. As Jakub crouched near the edge of the forest, he heard the distant clatter of boots on cobblestones. German soldiers were searching the village, their shouts muffled by the fog, but sharp enough to make his heart hammer against his ribs. He pressed himself against the cold, wet bark of an oak tree, feeling the rough texture bite into his cheek as he held his breath. His satchel, heavy with bread, herbs, and a small tin of water, slipped slightly from his shoulder, and he froze, listening intently for any sound that might give him away. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Every snapping twig, every rustling leaf was amplified in his ears, making the world feel impossibly large and dangerously alive. He remembered his father's words from months ago. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action despite fear. Slowly, with trembling fingers, he adjusted the strap of his satchel, keeping it pressed tightly against the trunk and hidden behind the rough bark. He willed his breathing to slow, his chest rising and falling in shallow, controlled motions, every muscle in his small body taut with tension. The soldiers passed, their boots thudding and voices fading into the mist, oblivious to the tiny boy crouched in the shadows. Jacob exhaled quietly, the relief washing over him in waves so intense that his knees nearly buckled. He waited a few more moments, listening for any sign that they might have turned back, before finally moving forward. Each step was careful and deliberate, avoiding loose stones and wet patches that might betray his presence. The forest seemed to hold its breath with him, the dense canopy above, casting shifting shadows that both concealed and threatened him. Every rustle of a branch, every distant cry of a crow made his pulse spike, yet he continued onward, small and determined, driven by a sense of duty far beyond his years. Finally, he reached the riverbank where the elders had gathered, huddled together under tattered blankets, their eyes wide with hunger and worry. Relief and apprehension mingled in their faces as Jacob approached. He handed out the bread, the herbs, and the water he had secretly carried, each item a fragile lifeline. Then he unfolded the tiny piece of paper tucked safely in his pocket, a note containing carefully coded plans, evacuation routes, safe houses, and discreet signals to alert the villagers if soldiers drew too near. As they read, their eyes shone with a spark of hope that had been all but extinguished by months of fear and deprivation. Jacob smiled faintly, a warmth blossoming in his chest. He had become more than a boy. In these moments, he was a lifeline, the fragile thread connecting survival to courage. The riverbank, though quiet and secluded, was alive with hushed movements. Villagers shifted bundles, adjusted blankets over shivering shoulders, and whispered plans to one another in low tones, careful to avoid alerting any wandering patrols. Jacob guided them gently, pointing out shallow spots in the river where small packages could be hidden and retrieved without detection, marking subtle scratches on tree trunks that served as secret markers. Every gesture was deliberate, every motion a silent calculation of risk and reward. The sun began to rise higher, scattering the early morning mist and revealing the battered landscape. Houses pockmarked with damage, fences broken or missing, livestock huddling fearfully in small pens. Jacob's eyes scanned the surrounding woods and fields constantly, ever vigilant for signs of patrols or hostile presence. Every breath, every step, every movement was imbued with purpose. He understood fully that the life and safety of those around him rested on his small shoulders, and that even a minor lapse could undo all the careful planning and courage that had brought them this far. As the morning stretched onward, Jacob continued his quiet work, distributing what supplies remained, giving small instructions in whispers, and checking each family's position along the riverbank. The villagers began to move with cautious confidence, bolstered by the boy's presence, as if the smallest member of their community had awakened a strength they had forgotten. Children clung to him, feeling safe in his shadow, while adults exchanged glances of admiration, silently acknowledging that his courage had exceeded that of many grown men. Even as the distant sounds of war, distant gunfire, thundering artillery, echoed faintly across the valley, Jacob remained focused, his attention unwavering. He had become, in this small but critical theater of survival, a beacon of hope, a fragile but unbroken thread in a world otherwise consumed by fear. And every heartbeat reminded him that bravery was measured not by age, but by the resolve to act when all else seemed lost. Evenings were the most dangerous. The forest grew darker with every passing hour, shadows stretching unnaturally between the trees, and the smell of damp earth thickened in Jacob's nostrils. German patrols often scoured the woods, their boots crunching over dead leaves and undergrowth, eyes scanning every shadow for signs of resistance. Jacob had to memorize every tree, every rock, and every gnarled root that could give him away. The smallest detail could mean the difference between life and death. He pressed himself low, moving like a ghost, using his small size to slip through undergrowth that adults could not navigate without making noise. His heart pounded in rhythm with each step, but he kept his breathing slow and steady, listening for the telltale sound of boots or voices. Each successful trip increased his confidence, but also the weight of the risk he carried. One wrong move could mean capture, interrogation, or worse. Jacob's mind constantly mapped the forest in minute detail. Which tree branches hung low enough to hide him, which patches of mud would betray his passage, and where the fallen logs could serve as shields. Every footstep was deliberate, every glance calculated. He had learned to move without making a sound, to pause mid-step when he heard a distant voice, to melt into the shadows when a patrol passed. Despite the constant fear, he felt a growing sense of purpose. The villagers depended on him. Their survival was literally in his hands. The thought of them, hungry, frightened, waiting for his deliveries, pushed him forward, even as the forest seemed to close in around him with every rustle and groan of the night. On one particularly cold and rainy night, the forest floor slick with mud and fallen leaves, Jacob encountered a German officer near the edge of a clearing. The officer's polished boots sank into the mud as he paused, looking directly at the boy with sharp, scrutinizing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Jacob froze, his chest tightening, his satchel weighing heavy against his shoulder as he calculated his next move. His mind raced, recalling the trick his mother had taught him. Never show fear, never hesitate, no matter how small or helpless you felt. He squared his shoulders, forcing a confident smile to his lips, and greeted the officer in a steady, calm voice, explaining that he was simply on his way to help his sick grandmother in the village. The officer's eyes narrowed, suspicious, scanning Jacob from head to toe. Rain soaked the boy's clothes and plastered his hair to his forehead, but he did not flinch. He met the gaze steadily, heart hammering, sweat and mud mixing on his brow. For a tense moment, it seemed as though the officer would question him further, demand papers, or even seize him. But after a long pause, the man waved him off, muttering something under his breath, unsure and cautious. Jakob exhaled slowly, barely daring to let his shoulders relax. Every nerve in his body screamed, adrenaline keeping him on edge as he continued forward, mud sucking at his boots, the rain soaking him to the bone. His courage had been tested to its absolute limit, and yet he pressed on, driven by the knowledge that every step, every delivery, every risk mattered. Jacob pressed deeper into the forest, moving faster now, yet still cautiously, scanning for shadows that might conceal other soldiers or snipers. He thought of the villagers waiting for him, of the fragile hope that his actions brought them. The rain intensified, dripping from the canopy, running down the folds of his coat and into his boots. Each puddle threatened to betray his presence with a splash, yet he managed to step lightly, as if the forest itself guided his movements. Despite his fear, a quiet determination settled over him. He knew that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the resolve to continue despite it. With every step, Jacob reaffirmed his role as the village's unseen protector, a tiny boy whose courage and cleverness had become as vital as the food and medicine he carried. The night stretched on endlessly. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the rain-soaked trees and the muddy forest floor. And the distant rumble of artillery reminded him of the war that had consumed so much of their lives. Yet, Jacob's focus never wavered. Each successful encounter, each clever avoidance of the soldiers, strengthened not just his confidence, but also the trust the villagers placed in him. They depended on his tiny, tireless figure to navigate danger and deliver life-saving aid. The forest, once a place of fear, became a landscape of careful mastery, mapped entirely in Jacob's mind. And as he pressed forward into the cold, dark night, he understood more clearly than ever that the survival of many rested in the hands of one small, determined boy. The villagers began to depend on Jacob in ways he had never imagined. Each day, he carried messages between families separated by the occupation, slipping through fields and forests with a quiet determination that belied his 10 years. Medicines stolen from abandoned pharmacies were tucked carefully into his satchel, and he delivered them to those too sick or weak to venture out. He even guided children across open fields to safe hiding spots, teaching them to move quietly, to watch for shadows, and to trust in his careful planning. Each mission was a delicate dance between life and death, and Jacob learned to measure each footstep, each glance, each rustle of leaves. Every successful journey brought relief and quiet joy, while every near mistake sent shivers of terror through him. His reputation grew slowly, carried by whispers among adults and children alike. They spoke of the small boy who moved like a shadow, invisible to the enemy, yet capable of what seemed miraculous, his bravery radiating like a light in the oppressive gloom of occupation. Weeks turned into months, and Jacob's small acts of bravery began to accumulate into something larger than himself. The villagers, inspired by his courage, started to organize more confidently. They hid livestock in makeshift pens deep within the woods, dug hidden storage pits to protect precious food from theft or seizure, and maintained a complex system of discreet signals, scratches on trees, marked stones, and subtle gestures that allowed them to evade the German patrols that roamed their lands. Each action, no matter how minor, was vital. The entire village became a living network of quiet resistance, and Jacob's courage had ignited it. Even the adults, hardened by years of war and loss, found themselves acting with renewed hope, emboldened by the example of the boy whose small hands carried such great responsibility. Jakob understood that the smallest details could make the difference between life and death. Every footstep, every shadow, every whispered instruction mattered. He memorized the routes of patrols, the patterns of soldiers' watch, and the hidden paths that could carry supplies or children safely from one hiding place to another. Each evening, he returned from his dangerous excursions with a mix of exhaustion and pride, his heart swelling with the knowledge that he was a lifeline for so many. The villagers, once fearful and resigned, began to believe in the possibility of survival, of continuing their lives despite the constant threat that loomed over them. Jakob's courage had become a spark, igniting a flickering flame of hope in the hearts of those who had long given up. Even the children began to emulate him, learning to move quietly, to be patient, to trust in their own abilities under his guidance. He taught them how to observe the soldiers' routines without being seen, how to signal one another across fields, and how to keep fear in check, even when danger seemed inevitable. Every successful mission reinforced the idea that bravery was not confined to adults, that even the youngest among them could make a meaningful difference. The forest became a classroom, the fields a training ground, and Jakob, though only 10, became both mentor and protector. The villagers' reliance on him grew, yet he bore it silently, never seeking recognition, motivated only by the desire to keep his community safe. Months passed, and Jakob's quiet heroism created a ripple effect across the village. Families coordinated their movements, supplies were more carefully managed, and the network of safe routes expanded. Villagers whispered among themselves about the boy whose courage seemed to defy both age and danger, a shadow who moved unseen through forests and fields, delivering hope where there had been only fear. Every stolen loaf of bread, every carefully delivered medicine, every message passed in secret reinforced their collective will to survive. And in the midst of it all, Jakob remained focused, vigilant, and unyielding, fully aware that his small hands carried a weight far greater than his years, shaping the fate of the entire village with each careful step he took. One day, Jakob found himself facing the ultimate test. A German patrol had discovered a hidden cache of supplies near the river, and the villagers were thrown into panic. Mothers clutched their children, elders whispered frantic prayers, and even the bravest adults felt the weight of despair pressing down upon them. Jakob, small and nimble, felt his stomach twist with fear, yet he stepped forward, volunteering to retrieve the remaining food before it could be seized or destroyed. The satchel on his back felt heavier than ever, filled with precious bread, dried herbs, and tins of preserved vegetables that represented the fragile lifeline of the entire community. He took a deep breath, recalling every lesson his mother had imparted: how to move silently, how to blend into shadows, how to remain calm even when danger pressed close. With a mix of fear and determination, Jakob crept through the mud-laden forest floor, every step deliberate and measured. The rain from the previous night had turned paths into slick trails of mud, sucking at his boots with every move. But he pressed on. Branches scraped his arms, leaves stuck to his wet clothing, and the distant calls of birds sounded unnervingly like the voices of approaching soldiers. Jakob's heart raced with a constant drumbeat of tension. One wrong step, one rustle too loud, could mean capture, interrogation, or worse. He remembered his father's stern voice and his mother's whispered advice. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is acting despite it. Guided by this, he pressed forward, eyes scanning for signs of danger, ears straining for the faintest indication of movement. every nerve on high alert. Miraculously, Jacob reached the cache of supplies hidden beneath a tangle of reeds and low-hanging branches by the riverbank. His small hands worked quickly, gathering every item with precision, carefully arranging them in his satchel to maximize space. The sound of the river flowing was loud in his ears, yet it masked the faint crunch of leaves under his own feet, concealing him from any prying eyes. He paused only briefly to survey the area, ensuring no patrols lurked nearby, before slipping back into the shadows. Every moment felt stretched, the forest alive with imagined threats and real danger alike. Yet Jacob's courage held firm. Step by careful step, he retraced his path, returning to the village unseen, his precious cargo intact. Word of Jacob's daring deeds began to spread beyond Wisoka. Stories of the 10-year-old boy who delivered food, medicine, and hope reached neighboring villages, carried on whispers and hushed conversations among resistance fighters. Tales of his cleverness, bravery, and unwavering resolve inspired similar acts of courage across the countryside. Even older, seasoned resistance members came to respect his ingenuity. Marveling at how a child could accomplish feats many adults deemed impossible, Jacob became a symbol, proof that age was no barrier to heroism, that courage could be found in the smallest of hands. Every act he performed reinforced a growing truth. In times of darkness, even the youngest and seemingly weakest among them could alter the course of events, their bravery radiating outward, inspiring hope where despair had once reigned. The villagers, emboldened by Jacob's example, began to act with newfound confidence. Families coordinated movements to avoid patrols, stored supplies in more secure locations, and used coded signals to communicate danger. Children and adults alike found courage they had thought lost, guided by the quiet determination of the boy who had faced the forest and the enemy without hesitation. Jacob, though just 10 years old, became the heart of their survival. And as the days turned into weeks, Jacob's legend grew, whispered across villages, carried along riverbanks, and told in secret by those who had been saved by his courage. Each small act, retrieving food, guiding a child, delivering a note, became part of a larger story of resilience and defiance. Jacob understood, even as a child, that his bravery was a thread connecting the village to survival, and that the smallest hands, when guided by purpose and love, could indeed shape the course of history. As the war dragged on, Jacob continued his work, each day sharpening his skills and growing in confidence. The forests and fields that had once seemed menacing became familiar territory, mapped carefully in his mind. He knew every path, every hollow, every hidden nook where a villager might wait or a patrol might appear. The village, once on the brink of starvation, transformed into a bastion of resilience. Families moved with quiet precision, guided by Jacob's knowledge of the land and the enemy. And even the youngest children learned to navigate the shadows, trusting in the boy who had become their protector. His story was not one of grand battles or heroic charges. It was the story of quiet courage, of countless small decisions made under constant threat, of a boy who understood that every life saved mattered far more than glory. Through long nights, when the moonlight barely pierced the fog, Jacob patrolled the village's outskirts, carrying supplies, messages, and hope. Rain and mud were constant companions, drenching his clothes and making each step heavier. Yet he pressed on, undeterred. He listened intently for approaching soldiers, memorized every patrol route, and taught villagers subtle signs to indicate safety or danger. Each mission demanded perfect timing and nerves of steel. Every successful delivery reinforced the fragile thread connecting survival to courage. Even in the face of exhaustion, fear, and the omnipresent threat of death, Jacob remained vigilant, understanding that the lives of dozens, perhaps hundreds, depended on his quiet diligence. By the time liberation arrived, Jacob was no longer just a boy. He had become a symbol of unwavering bravery. The villagers embraced him, tears mixing with the rain on that fateful morning, grateful for the courage of someone so young, someone who had moved through shadow and danger to preserve life. German soldiers retreated, leaving behind scars on buildings, memories, and hearts, but also a profound story of bravery. Stories of Jacob's quiet heroism spread among the liberated villagers, how a 10-year-old boy had outwitted soldiers, navigated forests in darkness, and maintained the fragile lifeline that had kept his community alive. His courage had ensured survival when hope was fragile and fear was pervasive. Jacob's actions had saved an entire community, proving that heroism was not always measured in battles won or enemies defeated, but in perseverance, vigilance, and compassion under the most trying conditions. Even the adults who had once doubted the resilience of children marveled at his ingenuity and resolve. His legacy endured in the hearts of the villagers, a reminder that courage often comes in the smallest, most unexpected forms. Children and adults alike would tell stories of Jacob's bravery, passing them down through generations, each retelling a testament to the power of determination, cleverness, and the indomitable spirit of a single child who refused to let fear dominate his actions. In the years that followed, Jacob's tale became part of the village's collective memory, a legend of survival, courage, and hope. He was remembered not just for what he did, but for what he inspired in others. The understanding that even in the darkest times, small acts of bravery could ripple outward, creating networks of safety, care, and defiance. His story illustrated a truth often overlooked in histories of war: that heroism can come from the most unlikely of sources, and that even the youngest hands can shape the fate of an entire community. Jacob, a boy of 10, had become a living testament to hope, courage, and the enduring human spirit, leaving a mark that would never fade.